Jesus is the light of the world. Welcome to Live with Passion. I'm Father Cedric Pizzania. I'm so glad that you decided to tune into the program today. This comes from the Gospel of John, chapter 9. As Jesus walked along, he saw a man who had been blind from birth. Jesus spat on the ground, made mud with his saliva, smeared the man's eyes with the mud. Then he told him, "Go wash in the pool of Siloam." This name means one who has been sent. The man went off and washed and came back able to see. This is Laetare Sunday. It is the fourth Sunday of Lent. You'll notice in my background I have pink. That's because we're in the pink. We have joy because Lent is more than half over. Also, Lent is a time of growth and we're growing together. Easter will be coming in a few weeks. We're joyful about that. And we're joyful that we can see. We just heard that gospel about the man born blind and how Jesus gave him sight. And oftentimes we take things for granted, like being able to see or being able to hear. These are precious gifts that God gives us. And it ought to bring us joy when we reflect upon it and be able to appreciate it. Helen Keller, who was blind, deaf, and mute, wrote, "It would be such a blessing if you were stricken blind for a few days. You would therefore appreciate so much more the gift of sight." And that is so true. One time I went to an elevator, get on the elevator, and I'm about to push the floor, and I noticed there were these little bumps right beneath the numbers. And I went over and I felt it, and sure enough, that's Braille for each number. And all of a sudden, I thought about my sight. I said, I've been walking throughout this day. I haven't even once thought about my eyes and how I can see. What a beautiful gift it is. And that little incident in the elevator reminded me to appreciate the gifts that I've been given. That brings joy to our life. I just had cataract surgery a couple months ago. That was pretty traumatic, going through all that with the eye drops and the operation itself and the different things. But I'll tell you what it did do. Made me appreciate sight. And thanks be to God, because of the prayers of so many people and the expertise of the doctor, I am seeing so very well. And I love to be able to see. What a gift. When we have stories in the Bible about blindness, it has a dual meaning. Yes, Jesus performed miracles. He was able to heal people who are blind. He is the Son of God. Wow. Can you imagine being able to see something like that? But it also has another meaning. Has a meaning about the spiritual. Has a meaning about sometimes we can be blind toward our own issues, we can be blind toward other people, and we can be blind toward God. It's always symbolic for something spiritual. We have to get that. You see, it's the fourth Sunday of Lent, and we are all together journeying with those who are joining the church. And even if you're not Catholic, we journey together toward a greater vision, toward wanting to see God more clearly, wanting to see our own issues, and wanting to understand who other people are in our life and not judge them, but accept them as they are. This is called the OCIA, the Order of Christian Initiation of Adults. The elect are journeying toward baptism, toward journeying the church, and during Lent, we journey with them. And the church puts before us this beautiful reading about the man born blind and Jesus healing him. He comes to new sight, new vision, and it's telling us that we can be enlightened and purified and come to new vision. We are scrutinized during the fourth Sunday of Lent by this gospel reading and by the prayer over the elect. And the prayer goes something like this: May God free us from false values that blind us, from selfishness and temptation that blinds us. And I'm praying that anything that obscures your vision toward looking within, toward God, toward other people, toward temptations, that anything that is obscuring your vision or making you blind will be taken away, that a healing will come for you so that you can see. Years ago, when I went to driving school before I got my license, I'll never forget this. My driving instructor taught us in the classroom and on the streets in the car. He taught us about the fact that we all have blind spots. I don't know if you've ever been to an optometrist and seen this, but right about here in each eye, we have blind spots. And when you look into your rearview mirror, the side mirror, you have to be careful because a motorcycle or a bicyclist might be passing by in your blind spot. So he always taught us to look twice in that mirror because we have blind spots. And we have a blind spot right here. I wiggle my fingers behind me. I can't see it. That's a parable in itself, that no matter how adept we all think we are about our own inner issues, we all have blind spots. We all have places where we can't see. We need enlightenment and illumination to be able to get in touch with what's going on within. One time I was in the confessional, we're talking about inner issues. People come to me, they confess their sins, they're so honest, they're so vulnerable, it's an amazing sacrament. One time a man came in using a cane, and he came and he sat down very gingerly, very carefully, because he was walking slowly. First thing he said is that, "Father, I'm legally blind," and I thanked him for coming. And then he proceeded to do an examination of conscience. He looked within, and he confessed his inner issues, his sins. He confessed things that people don't normally confess. He took such a good look within that he identified not only the issues, but the roots of the issues, what was causing the actions in his life, and he confessed them the best that he could. I sat there thinking to myself, wow, this man may be blind on the outside, but he can see inside. That's exactly what the church is inviting us to look at by giving us this story during the fourth Sunday of Lent. We've already journeyed through the desert. We've been up to the mountaintop. We've been with the woman who has received living water, the Samaritan woman. And now we're invited to take a look. Take a look within. That's called the examination of conscience. If you want to grow, if you want to change, you have to confront your issues. And how can you confront your issues if you don't know what they are? People everywhere are in denial about their anger, about addictions, about lust, about greed, because they don't really want to take a look within. You must examine what's in there. I'm inviting you during this season of Lent to do an examination of conscience. I have one on my website. You can download it for yourself, one that I've written, or just simply look at the 10 commandments. Are you keeping the commandments? Or look at the 7 deadly sins, anger and lust and greed and gluttony and all these different things, and take a look at your own life and say, what fits? What am I doing or not doing? And it's important because Lent is a season of growth and change. And unless you look within, you're not going to change. And it's a season of purification and enlightenment. And unless you're rigorously honest, that's a statement from the 12-step program, unless you're willing to confront your issues, you're not really going to change. One time, a blind man came to Jesus and he laid hands on him. This is different from this story. He laid hands on him and Jesus said, "Can you see?" And the man said, "Yeah, I can see, but it looks like people are walking trees." He couldn't quite see clearly. Jesus laid his hands on him again, Then he said, "Can you see?" And he says, "Yes, now I can see clearly." And that story tells me that vision and sight, change, growth, it's progressive. It's what I like to call a journey from selfishness to selflessness. I love that bumper sticker, "Be patient with me, God's not done with me yet." In the same way, that's why we have the 40 days of Lent as a season of progression, of change. We're not going to be perfect, but if we can keep moving and going along the path, then that's enlightenment. That's illumination. That's purification. And that's what we're after here. For those of you who are joining the church, we're praying that you will progress. For all of us who have been in the church for many years, and for those of you who aren't going to church, we can grow too. Jesus will bring new vision to you too, and that's what I'm praying. And that's why we have that reading about the man born blind. First issue that we need to look at is our inner life. Really important. People everywhere have blind spots to what's within. And then, of course, what's presented in the first reading for the fourth Sunday of Lent. The first reading identifies a blind spot toward people. If you remember the story, the prophet Samuel goes to the house of Jesse and he wants to anoint a new king. And Jesse parades his sons before him. He has 9 sons. And all the sons that are paraded before him, even though they were good looking and they looked like they had a lot of talent and expertise, every one, God said, "That's not the one, that's not the one." And Samuel was thinking, this must be the one. He would see each one of them was better than the one before. And then finally Samuel says, "Do you have any other sons?" And Jesse says, "Yeah, I have one more, but he's out in the field there with the sheep." He says, "Well, call him in." David is called in, the least of the sons, the youngest of the sons. And the Lord said, "That's the one, anoint him." Even Samuel made false judgments about people. Samuel the prophet made false judgments about people based on appearance. And then we hear in the scriptures, not as man sees does God see. Man looks at the appearance, but God looks into the heart. He anointed David as king of Israel. The Spirit of God rushed upon him. The rest is history. But it's that whole thing about judging others by the way they look. James warned us about that, the letter to James. He says, people come into your assembly with gold coins and gold jewelry, and you say, "Hey, sit up here, sit right in the first pew," and you make a big to-do about them. Then somebody comes in with shabby clothes, and you don't even want them to come into your church. Go sit in the back somewhere. And he says, haven't you made yourselves judges, judging by appearances? And doesn't God choose the weak rather than the strong and the rich to be heirs to the kingdom? And the scriptures are telling us, be careful about your judgments. It seems like more and more people that come into the confessional now are confessing that they're judging people harshly because of the way they look. And I must admit, I can do that too. I see somebody a man wearing an earring, or people with tattoos on their arms, or people with different colored hair. It's easy to start judging them. We've got to learn to accept people the way they are. The Lord looks into their heart. And I don't like it when I'm judged. People judge me harshly. I get letters from people because I'm on Protestant networks, as well as Catholic networks and stations, but I get letters from people because I'm a Catholic priest, judging me harshly because of Catholicism, when as outsiders, they don't know what it is to be Catholic and the truths that we believe we have. They're just simply judging me because of what they've heard or what they've read. You got to go beyond that. I remember one time I was back in the seminary at the Catholic Theological Union in Chicago, kind of cooped up in the building. It was springtime, the birds were chirping, the sun was out, it was a nice warm day, it was about 75 degrees. I said, I got to get out of this building and all these studies. And I went outside, took a walk. As I looked, there were some baseball fields over there by the University of Chicago. And I looked over there and there's a bunch of guys playing ball, and I thought to myself, I always love to play baseball and softball. I'm going to ask them if I can join them. But the one thing that I needed to tell you that I haven't told you yet, everybody playing softball was African American. There were no white people around. I was the only white person. And I went up to the captain, to the coach. I said, hey, can I join you guys and play a little bit? And he said, yeah, come on in. Turns out that the coach's name was Cedric. My name's Cedric, so that helped. But anyway, went out and played with those guys, and I'm pretty fleet of foot, and I can catch the ball very well. Ended up joining the team. Not only was I the only white person on the team, I was the only white person in the whole league. And we would go play all these different teams on the south side of Chicago. It was a lot of fun. But let me say this, that sometimes I got spoken against. I remember one time in particular, I came up to bat and there was a lot of people sitting behind me in the stands. I started hearing catcalls like, what's Whitey doing here? Why doesn't he go back where he came from? Now, they didn't know me. They didn't know that I was a seminarian. In fact, I was ministering in an African-American church in Chicago, St. Benedict the African. They didn't know that I was reaching out to the African-American community. They just saw the fact that I was white, and they were prejudiced against me. If you make judgments about people by the color of their skin, it's a sin. We got to give everybody a chance. I love what Dr. Martin Luther King said, because racism is so in the news nowadays, but I love Dr. Martin Luther King longed for the day when his children will be judged by the content of their character and not the color of their skin. When it comes to blind spots, we all have them. Sometimes in our judgments toward people, color of their skin, what they're wearing, where they go to school, the relationships that they have, the car that they drive. We have to be careful because it can be sinful. And that's what our church is presenting to us today by giving us that first reading. People look at appearances and judge, but God looks at the heart. Thank you, God, that you look at the heart. And He sees people that have a heart for Him. He forgives and He has mercy. And I'm praying that you will be enlightened and illumined about your judgments about other people. Then, like the Samaritan woman, the blind man had an awakening about Jesus. The Samaritan woman was last week, and if you remember, she progressively came to know who Jesus was. Same way with this man. He begins by calling Jesus a man. Then a little while later in the story, he calls him a prophet. Then at the end, he calls Jesus Lord, and he worships Him. And that's exactly what the church is wanting from us. By giving us this reading, it's telling us that we need to come to the revelation and the vision that Jesus isn't a man, and He's not just a prophet, but He's Lord. And we'll come to worship Him. That's how you know that you are saved, as it says in Romans. You confess with your lips that Jesus is Lord, and you believe in your heart that God raised Him from the dead, and you are saved. Wow. I grew up in a place called Feeding Hills, Massachusetts. Small town, just south of Springfield, actually a suburb of a town called Agawam. And it's named Feeding Hills, right on the Connecticut border. And in the town square, there was a statue of a woman named Anne Sullivan who was born in Feeding Hills. If you know anything about Anne Sullivan, she was the teacher of Helen Keller. Helen Keller, of course, blind, deaf, and mute. And that was popularized in the movie called The Miracle Worker, and Anne Bancroft played Anne Sullivan, and Patty Duke Austin played Helen Keller. Well, how do you teach somebody who's blind and deaf and mute? How do you teach them language? How do you break through to them? All they see is darkness. They can't hear. They can't speak. How do you do it? Well, we have other senses, and one of the other senses besides taste is touch. Anne Sullivan came up with this revelation that maybe through touch, I can teach Helen Keller how to speak. What she did is she took her hands and she poured water over her hands. And then on her hands, she traced the word water onto her hands. And of course, Helen Keller could feel that. Well, finally, after a little while, Helen Keller put two and two together, that substance she was feeling on her hands and that word being traced into her hands, water, were the one and the same. Helen Keller learned language. She wrote books and booklets and became a woman of great faith. And it all happened through water. You have to understand, Lent is a season where we reflect upon our baptism and what it means. We are preparing those who are joining the church, the elect, to be baptized. Our baptism into Christ, our being plunged into Christ, has eternal meaning. It means salvation, of course, the forgiveness of sins, the cleansing of original sin. But like Helen Keller and Anne Sullivan, the Spirit being Anne Sullivan trying to teach us, and we being Helen Keller, blind, deaf, and mute, needing illumination and enlightenment, water brings a whole new language. Our baptism brings communication with God. Things like being able to sense God speaking to you, not in an audible voice, but in a still small voice. Receiving impressions and direction and understanding and wisdom and knowledge, the gifts of the Spirit. Even though we're blind and deaf and mute in some ways, God works through our baptism, the waters of our baptism, to bring us to a whole new place and to even cause us to speak about His glory. I think about Zechariah in the New Testament, the father of John the Baptist. Because of his doubts, he was stricken mute, unable to speak. And then finally, his mouth was touched and he broke forth with praise and said his name, the name of his son, will be John. In the same way, God touches us through the waters of our baptism with this new language so that we can speak His praise and we can hear His voice in all kinds of beautiful new ways. That's what we're about in Lent, this journey of enlightenment and purification and growth, to be enlightened toward our inner issues, to be illumined about God's voice, and to be enlightened about other people, not judging them harshly, but accepting them the way they are. Jesus said, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will not be in darkness. Light, of course, guides our way, illumines our way. We have, on our iPhones, we have flashlights because sometimes we use them in the dark. We need a light to guide our way. Lighthouses protect ships or help ships to not crash into the shore or to the rocks. And then on ships, a sextant will be used to look up at the stars, the light of the stars, to guide the ship. In the same way, Jesus, the light of the world, illumines us to help us look within and to identify our issues. Jesus' light illumines us to look at others and look past what they're wearing, past the car they drive, past the color of their skin, and look at their heart and accept them. Jesus illumines us to see Him as He is, progressively to go from a man or a prophet to call Him Lord and to worship Him. And then Jesus illumines us to know Him and to hear His voice. It is Laetare Sunday. We are in the pink. Easter is around the corner. We have grown during this season of Lent. We're over halfway. And now I pray that you will have the joy of being illumined and enlightened and appreciate the sight that God has given you. Don't just live, live with passion. I get such encouragement from the emails and the letters that I get from viewers. This one woman said, Father Cedric, your messages bless me, and I wanted you to know that when you speak, the Word of God comes alive, trying to do that. It's wonderful to be reborn and to have Jesus in my life. That's exactly what Lent is all about. It helps you to center in on Jesus, to experience growth and rebirth, enlightenment, purification. I wrote a book called Your Best Lent Ever. I want you not to just journey through Lent, but to have a significant Lent where you actually change. I have an examination of conscience in that book where you can look within. And I want you to be able to grow, especially in your relationship with God, to encounter the Holy Spirit, to know Jesus as Lord, to pray to God your Father in a deep, intimate way. This book, Your Best Lent Ever, will help you in all the areas that Lent puts before us and help you to have your best, most significant, life-changing Lent ever. Whenever you purchase one of my books, it supports my programs so that I can reach out everywhere to Catholics, non-Catholics, to people that don't go to church with the life-giving gospel of the Lord so that everyone will know Jesus as Lord. Please call 844-FATHER-C. You can order there. Go to my secure website, fathercedric.org, frcedric.org, or simply write me in Houston, Texas. We'll send that book to you. Thank you, thank you, thank you in advance for your donations, for your purchases. Get this CD and the DVD of this series about Lent. I know that it'll touch you and bless you. Thank you in advance. Don't just live, live with passion.
Billions of years ago, before the universe or Earth came into existence, God had you in mind. When the time was finally right, God created you and called you by name. In this powerful series, Father Cedric proclaims that God continues to call you to a personal relationship and inner transformation. Right now, simply call or go online and order the book Father talked about. Because of these programs, people everywhere are discovering God's call in a fresh new way. Every purchase supports Father Cedric in his God-given mission to touch lives and save souls. Father Cedric is a Catholic priest with a professed vow of poverty. Be assured that the money from your purchases will be used to produce and air Live with Passion. To purchase these powerful resources, simply call 844-FATHER-C. That's 844-328-4372. Or write Father Cedric at 430 Bunker Hill Road, Houston, Texas 77024. Or log on fathercedric.org and order online. Thank you in advance for your generosity. Together we are touching lives and saving souls.